August 1977, 2 days after Elvis Presley's passing, Graceland staff stumbled upon a locked door no one had ever noticed before. The key was hidden in his bedside drawer. When they opened it, what they found wasn't gold, fame, or trophies, but something so personal, so unexpected, that it changed how even his closest friends remembered him forever. August 17, 1977. Memphis, Tennessee. The morning light cut through the thick curtains of Graceland like pale ribbons. Outside the mansion gates, thousands of fans stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching candles and photographs. Some cried, some prayed. All were silent, waiting for something that would never come back. Inside, the world felt smaller. The air smelled faintly of cologne, coffee, and grief. Elvis Presley was gone, and the home that once pulsed with music now echoed with nothing but whispers. In the living room, 3 men sat in stunned quiet: Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager; Jerry Schilling, one of his oldest friends; and Vernon Presley, his father. The 3 men spoke in fragments. No one knew what to do next. "Lock the upstairs," Vernon said finally, his voice rough from crying. "We need to keep everything the way he left it." They nodded. No one argued. Joe stood up, running a shaky hand through his hair. "He's really gone, isn't he?" Jerry glanced toward the staircase. "Feels like any second he's gonna walk down and ask what we're all sitting around for." Vernon didn't answer. His hand trembled as he reached for a framed photo of Elvis holding Lisa Marie. He stared at it for a long moment before setting it back down. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, slow, steady, like the sky itself was mourning. The staff moved quietly through the halls, covering mirrors, closing curtains, keeping reporters out. Each room looked exactly as Elvis had left it. Guitars leaning against chairs, half-written lyrics on napkins, a half-eaten sandwich still on a plate in the kitchen. But when Joe went upstairs to check the hallway, something strange caught his eye. At the very end of the corridor, past the music room and the private office, there was a door he couldn't remember ever seeing before. Plain white, no label, no handle on the outside, just a small brass keyhole. He frowned. "Jerry," he called out, "you ever seen this?" Jerry joined him, wiping his eyes. "No, not once." "It's locked," Joe said, tugging at it gently. Jerry leaned closer, pressing his ear to the wood. "You hear that?" Joe shook his head. "Nothing." "Exactly," Jerry whispered. "It's dead quiet in there." They exchanged uneasy looks. Joe tried again. "Maybe it's storage." Jerry frowned. "Elvis didn't keep secrets from us." But even as he said it, the doubt hung in the air. They both turned as Vernon walked up behind them, his steps heavy. "What's going on?" "Locked door," Joe said. "Don't remember it being here." Vernon looked at it, long and hard. His eyes flickered with something like recognition, then worry. "Leave it," he said quietly. "It's nothing." But Joe hesitated. "Sir, if it's something important—" "I said leave it," Vernon interrupted. His voice cracked, but his tone was firm. "Not tonight." The men nodded, stepping back. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain outside grew louder, hammering against the windows. Somewhere downstairs, a phone rang. Another reporter, another condolence call. Vernon turned away from the door, heading back down the hall. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll deal with it tomorrow." But that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Joe Esposito couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had Vernon looked so afraid? What could Elvis have possibly locked away, in a house where every room had already told its story? And why did no one, not even his closest friends, know that door existed? As he lay awake listening to the rain, Joe couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, the king of rock and roll had kept one last secret from the world. The next morning, the sun rose over Memphis with a dull orange haze. Crowds still camped outside Graceland's gates, clutching signs and radios. Reporters stood on the lawn, whispering updates to a world that still couldn't believe Elvis was gone. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was heavy, hushed, like even the walls were in mourning. Joe Esposito hadn't slept. The image of that locked door kept replaying in his mind. Every creak of the house made him glance toward the stairs. Around 9 a.m., Vernon called the close staff together in the kitchen. "We've got to pack up some of his things," he said quietly. "Lisa and Priscilla will be coming soon." Joe nodded but barely heard him. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling, the hallway above, the door. After the meeting broke, he caught Jerry by the back porch. "I can't stop thinking about it." Jerry sighed. "The room." "Yeah," Joe said. "You saw Vernon's face. He knew something." Jerry hesitated. "Maybe it's nothing." Elvis had storage for everything: fan mail, jumpsuits, records. "You know that." Joe shook his head. "He didn't hide those behind a locked door." The house was quiet again. They could hear the low hum of the air conditioner and faint music from the mourners' radios outside. Finally, Jerry gave in. "You want to check it out?" Joe didn't answer, just started walking toward the stairs. The upstairs hallway felt colder that morning. Dust motes floated in the light, spilling through the curtains. They passed Elvis's bedroom, the bed unmade, the clock still frozen at the hour they'd found him. At the end of the hall, the white door waited. Still, silent. Jerry ran his fingers along the frame. No fingerprints, no scratches. Like it's never been touched. Joe knelt down, eyeing the small brass keyhole. Maybe it's in his room. Back inside Elvis's bedroom, drawers were half open, filled with sunglasses, pill bottles, scraps of lyrics written on hotel stationery. Joe opened the top drawer of the nightstand. Beneath a pair of cufflinks sat a small brass key, simple but old. He held it up. It matched the lock perfectly. Jerry exhaled. "You sure about this?" Joe didn't answer. He just turned the key. Click. The lock gave way with a sound that seemed to echo down the entire corridor. The door creaked open an inch, cold air spilling out like a sigh. They both froze. Inside was darkness. The curtains were drawn tight. Dust shimmered in the single beam of light from the hallway. The air smelled faintly of cedar and paper. Joe reached for the light switch. Nothing. "Maybe the power's off," Jerry whispered. "Maybe," Joe said. He pulled a lighter from his pocket and flicked it. The small flame lit the room just enough to see. Shelves lined the walls, neat, deliberate. No gold records. No stage costumes. Just boxes, notebooks, and a single wooden chest sitting in the center of the room. It wasn't big, but it looked old. The kind of chest that didn't belong in a house full of luxury. Something handmade, something personal. Jerry stepped closer. "What is this place?" Joe crouched beside the chest. The lighter's glow reflected off a brass plate fixed to the top. One word was engraved on it. "Private." He hesitated. "You think we should open it?" Jerry swallowed hard. "If we don't, someone else will." Joe exhaled, then lifted the latch. The hinges groaned. Dust lifted like smoke. Inside, no money, no jewelry, no awards. Only paper. Stacks of it. Handwritten letters bound in ribbon. Tapes labeled in marker. A Bible. A photograph of a young Elvis and his mother, Gladys. The lighter flickered as Joe whispered, "This isn't storage. This is something else." He reached for one of the tapes. On the label, written in Elvis's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Room B, August 1976. Jerry frowned. "What's Room B?" Joe shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but I think we just found it." The lighter sputtered and went out. The room plunged into darkness. From outside, thunder rolled again. Low, distant, like a warning. What if the king had left behind more than fame? What if he'd hidden a side of himself no one was ever meant to see? And if that truth was finally uncovered, could anyone handle it? Jerry lit another match, its tiny flame trembling. "Joe," he whispered, "look at the note on the chest lid." In faint pencil, scrawled across the wood, were 5 haunting words. "For after I'm gone, peace." The matchlight trembled as Joe and Jerry leaned over the open chest. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the room. It wasn't the smell of secrets. It was the smell of memory. Joe brushed the dust aside. Inside lay neat bundles of envelopes, tied with faded blue ribbon. Each bundle was labeled in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting. To Lisa. To Priscilla. For me, don't forget. Jerry picked one up carefully. He wrote to them? Joe nodded. And maybe to himself. The first letter crackled as he unfolded it. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were clear. For Lisa. If you're reading this, your daddy is home now. Don't remember the noise. Remember the laughs. When you sing, sing loud. Don't hide your voice like I did. Joe swallowed hard. He set it down as if it might shatter. The next envelope was marked to Priscilla. Jerry hesitated. We shouldn't. But Joe had already opened it. I tried to be bigger than pain, and I ended up smaller than love. Tell Lisa I never stopped trying to be worthy of you both. Silence. The hallway clock ticked somewhere outside the door. The two men sat on the floor, surrounded by fragments of a life they'd only seen from the spotlight's edge. Jerry whispered. All these years we thought we knew him. Joe stared at the chest. We knew the performer, not the man who wrote this. At the bottom of the stack sat one final envelope, unsealed, addressed only as to whoever finds this. Joe opened it slowly. If you're reading this, it means I've gone home. Don't grieve too loud. I had more love than a man deserves. But I never figured out how to be alone with my own voice. Everything they called glory was just noise. Inside this room are the pieces of the quiet I was looking for. The page ended there, and signed, but the looping P of Presley was unmistakable. Joe's voice cracked. He knew. He knew he was tired. Jerry wiped his eyes. He was saying goodbye in advance. Joe turned toward the shelves. Along one side were reel-to-reel tapes, stacked in chronological order, handwritten labels. Vegas 72, Stack Studio Sessions, Private 1, Room B. He pulled one down. On its back someone had scribbled in pencil, "Keep this safe." A small tape recorder sat beside the chest. Joe lifted the lid, checked the batteries, pressed play. Static. Then a low hum. Then Elvis's voice. Not the stage voice. Not the roar of the crowd. It was quieter, weary, human. "It's me," he said softly. "If anyone hears this, I hope you remember I tried. I really did." He paused, breathing audible. "They love the king, but the king gets lonely too." The recorder clicked. Then came faint piano keys. A single gospel tune, half finished. The same melody he'd hummed backstage for years. Jerry whispered, "That's him praying." For a minute, neither man spoke. The sound filled the tiny room like church air. When the tape stopped, Joe rewound it halfway and pressed play again, just to hear the same fragile voice one more time. Then he noticed a smaller cassette tucked under the recorder. Its label read, "Room B, if found after." Joe looked at Jerry. "Should we?" Jerry shook his head. "We're already in too deep." But Joe pressed play anyway. The sound was faint at first. Rain against glass. Then Elvis whispering something almost drowned by static. "Peace. That's all I ever wanted." The rest was silence. The tape clicked off. Joe set the recorder down, hands trembling. He knew this room would be found. Jerry exhaled. Then maybe he wanted someone to understand him, finally. They stared at the chest, surrounded by paper ghosts and magnetic echoes. What if the king of rock and roll had been building a sanctuary, not a shrine? And what if all the gold and glitter had been hiding the one thing he'd been missing? Peace? Joe gathered the letters back into the chest, careful not to disturb their order. "We can't let this go missing," he said. "Not to the press. Not to anyone." Jerry nodded. "Then we lock it again, just like he left it." As they turned to leave, Jerry stopped at the door and looked back at the room. The quiet shelves, the chest, the faint smell of cedar and ink. He whispered, "Guess this was the only stage he didn't share." Outside, thunder rolled once more, soft and far away. Joe closed the door gently behind them, the key still warm in his hand. He slipped it into his pocket. Down the hall, the fans outside began to sing "Love Me Tender." And upstairs, behind that white door, the king finally rested. Later that evening, Graceland was nearly silent. Most of the staff had gone home, and the crowds outside had thinned to candles flickering in puddles. Only Joe and Jerry remained upstairs, sitting at the top of the staircase, the brass key between them. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Jerry said, "We should tell Vernon." Joe stared at the floor. Tell him what? That his son built a room just to talk to himself. The sentence hung heavy in the dim hall. Somewhere below, a clock chimed once, soft and hollow. They both knew what Elvis had left behind wasn't gossip or memorabilia. It was confession. Joe turned the key over in his hand. He wanted this to stay quiet. Jerry nodded. But what if it's something people need to hear? That thought, something people need to hear, kept them from leaving. Back in the small white room, the air was cool again. The lighter flame danced against the wooden chest. Joe set the tape marked Private 1 Room B into the recorder. He pressed play. Static. Then the faint hiss of an old reel turning. A chair scraped. And then came Elvis's voice. Tired but steady. The same tone he used when he spoke to close friends in the middle of the night. "It's quiet now. Feels good." He took a breath. You could hear it clearly. The inhale, the weight of a man carrying too much. "Everybody keeps a skin. What I'm gonna do next. I wish I knew. I think I just want to sit still for once." A soft piano chord followed, hesitant, like fingers remembering faith. Mama used to say, "You can't outrun the sound of your own heart." I think she was right. The words cut through the static like glass. Jerry whispered. He was recording his thoughts. Joe nodded, eyes wet. Not thoughts, prayers. The tape continued. "If you're listening, I hope you remember me for the songs that made you feel something, not the ones that sold out the shows. And if you ever get tired of the noise, find your own quiet room." Then came humming. A gospel tune, maybe Peace in the Valley, but slower, fragile, fading halfway through. The tape clicked once, paused, then restarted. A new track. "This one's for Lisa. She's gonna be brave. She gets that from her mama." He chuckled softly, then sighed. "Priscilla, if you ever hear this, thank you for teaching me how to be gentle, even when I wasn't." A long silence followed. Only the whirring of the tape. "I hope God likes music." Click. Silence again. Joe swallowed. That's it. But the tape wasn't done. It hissed back to life. "If the lights ever go out for me, don't let 'em turn this room into a museum. Let it stay quiet." The final words came like a whisper through the hiss. "Tell the truth, even when you sing it." Then the reel spun out. For a moment, neither man breathed. The flame flickered. Jerry finally said, "No one's ever heard that Elvis before." Joe rewound the tape slightly, just to confirm it was real. He pressed play again. Same voice, same trembling honesty. This wasn't an idol. It was a man stripped of spotlight and myth. What if the world's greatest performer had been rehearsing not for the stage, but for forgiveness? And what if the quiet between his words was the real message? Joe shut the recorder off, clutching the reel like it might disappear. He looked around the small room, the chest, the shelves, the folded letters. "Do we keep it?" he asked. Jerry nodded. "We keep it safe." They packed the letters back inside the chest, wrapped the tapes in a soft towel, and closed the lid. The metal latch clicked, a sound final enough to feel like a promise. As they stepped into the hallway, lightning flashed outside, spilling blue light across the walls. Down below, Vernon's voice echoed faintly through the house, calling their names. Joe whispered, "He can't know about this yet." Jerry hesitated. "Then what do we tell him?" Joe looked back once more at the white door. "We tell him we found a room of silence, because some truths he realized aren't meant to be shouted. They're meant to be protected." He pocketed the key again. Behind the door, the tape still spun, empty, clicking softly in the dark, like a heartbeat fading into eternity. That night, the rain stopped, but the air around Graceland felt heavier than before. The mansion lights glowed dim through the curtains. The world outside mourned a legend, but inside, a father mourned his son. Vernon Presley sat alone in Elvis's office, a small lamp glowing over stacks of untouched papers. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His eyes were red, but dry. He had cried all he could. The door creaked. Joe Esposito stepped in, holding his hat in both hands. "Mr. Presley," he said softly. "We finished going through the rooms. Everything's secure." Vernon nodded, not looking up. "Good. I don't want anyone touching a thing." Joe hesitated. "There's one more thing, sir." Vernon finally lifted his gaze. His voice came low, almost wary. "The room." Joe froze. The old man already knew. Vernon leaned back in his chair. "I told you to leave it." "I know," Joe said. "But we found something in there. Letters. Tapes. A note." Vernon's jaw tightened. "You opened it?" Joe swallowed. "We had to. We thought it was storage, sir." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint buzz of the lamp. Then Vernon whispered, "He told me about that room once. Said he needed a place to keep his peace." He looked down at his hands. They shook slightly. "He said the noise was getting louder, that he needed a place to think." Joe set the brass key gently on the desk. "There's a recording, sir. He talks about all of you, about Lisa, about God." Vernon didn't touch the key. He just stared at it as if it might burn him. "He was talking to someone," Joe said. "Or maybe to himself." Vernon finally stood. His shadow stretched long across the carpet. "Where is it?" Joe hesitated. "Locked up. We didn't show anyone." The older man walked to the window. Outside, lightning flickered in the distance, lighting up the sea of fans still standing in vigil. "You ever wonder why he sang those gospel songs so much?" he said. Joe stayed quiet. Vernon continued. "He said they made him feel smaller than the crowd. Reminded him he wasn't God. That was his way of staying human." He turned back, eyes glistening. "He built that room for himself, not for the world. I think he wanted one thing in this life to stay untouched." Joe nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" Vernon reached for the key, turning it once between his fingers. "We lock it again." "But, sir—" "No," Vernon said firmly. "The world's already picked him apart. His songs, his mistakes, his heart. They don't get this too." He walked past Joe, voice trembling now but strong in conviction. "That room belongs to my son and to God, not to history." He paused at the door, looking back. "You make sure it stays that way." Joe lowered his head. "Yes, sir." Vernon pressed the key back into Joe's hand. "You keep it. But promise me, when I'm gone, it goes with me." Joe hesitated. "And the tapes?" Vernon's eyes softened. "He was praying in those, wasn't he?" Joe nodded. "Then we let his prayer stay answered." The room fell still again. The lamp flickered once. Outside, the crowd began singing "Can't Help Falling in Love." Thousands of voices drifted through the humid Memphis night. Vernon whispered, "You see, they already heard enough of him." As Joe stepped into the hallway, he looked back once more. The office door closed slowly, the brass key still warm in his hand. What if love means protecting someone's truth, even from the world that worships them? And what if the truest legacy isn't what we share, but what we choose to keep sacred? 10 years passed. The world kept spinning. The music never stopped. But somewhere inside Graceland, a door stayed locked. By 1987, Graceland had become more than a home. It was a museum, a shrine, a place where millions came to feel close to a man who'd made them believe in something bigger than fame. Tours ran daily now. Flashbulbs lit the walls. People whispered as they passed through velvet ropes, gazing at jumpsuits, guitars, and platinum records. But not every room was open. At the top of the stairs, beyond a rope marked staff only, the hallway turned quiet again, and at the end of that hallway, the plain white door still stood. Few even noticed it, and none knew what waited behind it. Until one rainy afternoon in the summer of 1987. Caroline Moore, a young curator helping update the archive inventory, was cataloging frames in a back storage closet when she found a cardboard box marked simply "Private Office of V. Presley." Inside, between stacks of invoices and a broken picture frame, was a small envelope sealed with aging tape. Across the front, in faded ink, it read, "Do not exhibit. Curiosity 1." She peeled it open. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed a small wooden chest sitting in the center of a dimly lit room. Cedar walls, shelves of notebooks, a reel-to-reel recorder on a side table. There was handwriting on the back of the photo. Room B, August 1977. Caroline frowned. Room B, she whispered. She'd spent months inside Graceland. There was no record of any room by that name. She showed it to her supervisor, an older archivist named Ray Coleman, who immediately went pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In a box marked for Vernon Presley's office," she said. He stared at the photo for a long time before slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Forget you saw this," he muttered. "Why?" she pressed. Ray sighed. "Because some doors aren't meant to be reopened." But later that night, curiosity found its way to paper. Caroline wrote a brief memo in her own notebook. Photo labeled Room B. Possible sealed section upstairs. Verify existence when clearance allows. That note, small, scribbled, almost careless, would be the spark that reignited the mystery a decade after Elvis's death. Weeks later, that same photo quietly leaked to a Memphis Tribune journalist. The article appeared on page 7 under the headline, "The Hidden Room Inside Graceland. What did Elvis keep locked away?" The story was short, barely 500 words, but it spread fast. Fans speculated it was a vault of unreleased music. Others believed it was where he wrote letters to his mother. Some even claimed it held his final recordings, the ones meant for God alone. Graceland's staff denied everything. The paper retracted the story within a week, citing incomplete verification. But the legend didn't disappear. Bootleg collectors started whispering about Room B tapes. A man at a record fair in Nashville claimed he'd heard one. He said it was just Elvis, alone at a piano, humming a gospel tune that ended with the words, "I'm finally home." No one could prove it, but those who believed they didn't need proof. Caroline was quietly dismissed from her position that fall. Ray retired not long after. The photograph vanished from the archives. Yet every now and then, during late-night tours when the halls fell silent, staff swore they heard faint piano notes drifting down from upstairs, notes that weren't coming from any speaker. One tour guide even said she saw a thin line of light beneath the locked door at the end of the hall. When she called for security, it vanished. She laughed it off later, but the story spread among employees. They started calling that part of the house Room B. Visitors sometimes asked where it was. Guides would smile politely and change the subject. But deep down, every person who worked inside Graceland knew the truth. There really had been a room that no one spoke of. And in one forgotten drawer of the archive basement, a copy of that Polaroid still exists. The ink almost faded now, but you can still read the date on the back. August 1977. The photo never made it to the exhibits. But maybe that's exactly what Elvis wanted. A single piece of his soul left untouched by the world that tried to own him. Because sometimes the quietest things we leave behind tell the loudest stories. And sometimes, the door that stays closed says more than all the ones that are open. The rumor never really died. By the late 1990s, Graceland was drawing over 500,000 visitors each year. The crowds came for the gold, the cars, the rhinestones. But they always whispered about the white door at the end of the hall. Tour guides called it off-limits. Fans called it Room B. The myth had grown a life of its own. Every new employee heard the same story. Somewhere upstairs, there's a chest, a tape, and a prayer that never made it to the stage. Most brushed it off. But not everyone. One winter morning in 1999, a young staff technician was cleaning the attic when he found an unmarked reel in a box of damaged audio. The handwriting on its edge stopped him cold. E. Presley, Private 2, Room B. He turned it in to the archive office, expecting it to be cataloged and forgotten. But the archivist on duty, the same Caroline Moore, reinstated years later, froze when she saw it. "Where did you find this?" she asked. The technician shrugged. "Box of scrap reels. Could be blank." Caroline locked the door, threaded the tape through a vintage player, and pressed play. Static. Then, faintly, that unmistakable drawl. "If you're hearing this, then peace found me after all." Her heart stopped. The voice was soft, at ease. Not the performer, but the man beneath the crown. I kept this one hidden, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted a part of me to stay mine. He paused. You could hear the faint click of a lighter, the inhale of a cigarette, and then, "Don't make this room a secret. Make it a reminder." Then, a single piano chord, low and gentle, followed by the whisper, "Thank you for listening." The tape ended. Caroline sat still for nearly an hour, the machine whirring softly beside her. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Some truths, she thought, need to breathe in silence before the world gets to them. But a year later, during a Graceland renovation, she placed a small brass plaque on the base of the grand staircase. It read simply, "Room B, dedicated to peace." There was no explanation, no exhibit, no photograph. Just those 3 words. Visitors noticed it, of course. Some asked, "What's Room B?" Guides smiled and said, "It's a story about finding quiet after the music stops." And somehow that answer was enough. The legend lived on. Not in documentaries, not in tabloids, but in whispers. Fans would leave folded notes near the staircase. Little prayers scribbled on ticket stubs. "Thank you for the music. Hope you found peace." By 2017, the plaque had become one of Graceland's most photographed spots. Not because it revealed anything, but because it didn't. Sometimes, mystery holds more truth than answers ever could. One evening, Lisa Marie Presley herself was seen standing quietly near it. She didn't speak, didn't move for several minutes, just placed her hand on the rail, closed her eyes, and smiled through tears. A fan standing nearby swore he heard her whisper, "He finally got his quiet." Whether that was true or not, nobody argued. Because deep down, everyone who came to Graceland understood what that hidden room really meant. It wasn't about secrets. It was about stillness. It was about a man who gave everything to the noise of the world and carved out one sacred corner to give back to himself. Maybe that's why the legend endures. Not because people crave mystery, but because they crave permission to stop performing, to breathe, to be human again. The king of rock and roll's final gift wasn't another song. It was the reminder that even the loudest lives need quiet to stay alive inside. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Room B really was. If the story moved you, share it with someone who still believes peace is something you have to earn. Elvis spent a lifetime chasing applause, but in the end, he found grace in silence. Maybe that's the message we all need today, because every soul deserves its own Room B.